North End, Boston, January 1919. It was a seemingly ordinary winter day on January 15th, 1919. The people of Boston went about their daily routines, unaware that a disastrous event was about to unfold. Little did they know that a giant, seemingly harmless tank of molasses was harboring a sweet yet treacherous secret. 8-year-old Anthony DeStasio hurried along a crowded sidewalk in Boston's North End. As usual, the streets were crowded with honking motor cars and clattering horse-drawn wagons. After weeks of freezing cold, the day was warm and sunny. Anthony's tattered wool coat flapped open as he hurried toward the tiny apartment where he lived with his parents and 3 sisters. Like most of the people who lived in this poor Boston neighborhood, Anthony's family had come from southern Italy, eager to start a new and better life in America. What they found was hardship. Anthony's father worked long hours on the waterfront. Anthony's mother struggled to make their dingy 2-room apartment into a decent home, to chase away the cockroaches, to cover up the stink of garbage and horse manure that wafted up from the streets. Life was tough for the people of the North End, and the past 2 years had been especially challenging, not only for them, but for most Americans. A shocking disaster was about to strike Anthony's neighborhood. In fact, a deadly threat had been looming over the North End for years. It was not a German bomb or a deadly disease. It was a giant steel tank filled with molasses. Molasses is a thick brown syrup that was once the most popular sweetener in America. Like white sugar, molasses comes from the sugarcane plant, which grows in the Caribbean and other hot and humid regions. Until the late 1800s, white sugar was so expensive that only rich people could afford it. As if the North End weren't already grim enough, now a 3-story steel tank towered over the neighborhood, blotting out the sun and blocking the view of the harbor. But it wasn't only the tank's ugliness that upset the residents of the North End. Just hours after it was first filled with molasses, brown syrup was leaking from the seams of the tank, oozing like blood from invisible wounds. When the tank was filled, it rumbled and groaned, as though the steel walls were crying out in pain. Some people living near the tank worried it was unsafe. But what could they do about it? USIA was a big company, and the people in the North End were poor and powerless. It was a time when many Americans viewed immigrants with deep suspicion and prejudice. Even a person bold enough to complain about the dangerous tank would have had a hard time finding anyone willing to listen and help. And so the years passed. The molasses kept leaking from the tank. The noises of the straining steel grew louder, until the moment on that bright January day in 1919, after years of strain, the tank was breaking apart. People froze in their tracks. And then came a thundering explosion. "Run!" a man screamed. "It's the tank!" Anthony looked up just as the molasses tank seemed to crack apart like a massive egg, unleashing 2.7 million gallons of thick, sticky molasses. The molasses formed a gigantic brown wave, 15 feet high, 160 feet wide, and traveling at a staggering 35 miles per hour. The sticky syrup was far heavier and more destructive than a wave of ocean water, and it moved with incredible speed and power. Within seconds, it crushed wooden houses and flattened a 3-story fire station. It swept away motor cars and snapped electrical poles. Anthony and dozens of others were caught in the violent swirl. The wave pulled Anthony under. Molasses gushed into his mouth. He was carried for several blocks until he crashed into a metal lamppost. The blow knocked him out. Survivors described the horror they witnessed. They spoke of the deafening roar, the desperate cries for help, and the desperate struggle to escape the clutches of the relentless molasses. In the aftermath, a rescue operation like no other took shape. Brave individuals, with their sleeves rolled up, worked tirelessly to free those trapped and clear the wreckage. It was a race against time to save as many lives as possible. Within hours of the disaster, leaders of USIA were insisting that the disaster was not their fault. Their tank, they claimed, had been bombed by criminals. But few believed this explanation. In the weeks following the disaster, experts sifted through the wreckage, inspecting the remains of the tank. They spoke to residents who had seen the leaks and heard the strange noises echoing from the tank. The experts' conclusion? The tank had been shoddily built, and the leaders at USIA had known it. USIA refused to take responsibility, and at first it seemed the company would not be punished. But the victims demanded justice. The trial dragged on for years, but finally USIA was forced to pay $1 million, equal to about $7 million today. For the poor immigrants of the North End, it was a big victory. It took years for the North End to rebuild after the flood. Even today on hot days, some claim that the sweet scent of molasses rises up, like a ghost. If you like to hear real-life stories like this, please leave a like and subscribe for more content. If there are any real-life stories you would like to feature, leave a comment in the comments section, and I will do well to research it. Bye for now, everyone.